with the living building challenges? Raise your hand again. All right, that's excellent. So some of you who know how the Institute works know that there are collaboratives all over the world. You guys are seeing the first ever actual panel event of the Silicon Valley Collaborative, which we're very excited about. We formed this collaborative because we saw this is an area, I guess that I should clarify that there are two collaboratives in the Bay Area. There's the San Francisco Bay Area Collaborative and the Silicon Valley Collaborative. And of course we collaborate closely. But we really saw this area as just such a center of tech and innovation where a lot of really exciting things could happen around sustainability. So we saw this as a really exciting opportunity to get a collaborative started here. So the way that we're set up is we have a core group, and if you're in that core group, would you please stand up? I want you to be recognized for all the hard work you put in. All right, take a bow. You guys are awesome. You have Hillary, Priya, Marilyn, and Juhi and the core committee. We're really sort of the ones that are planning these events and really working closely together to keep the ball rolling, to keep this happening. These are going to be quarterly events, so please look out for them. We also have an amazing advisory sort of group that has been really pivotal in helping define this. Clark Brockman couldn't be here tonight, he's with Sarah Architects, but he's been really fantastic in just helping to form our thought around this. And also pretty much all the panelists have been really great at advising us and helping us know what to say and what to do. We also have opportunities for volunteers at various events, so if you're interested in any of those sort of roles, please come talk to us. I want to thank the AIA Santa Clara Valley chapter. I don't see April here at the time being, but they've been really great in making this available for AACEUs. So if you are an architect and you do need those CEUs, please go to the registration table and sign up. Other than that, we have Brendan from the USGBC here. He's really awesome. We see him as a great partner in the future. And I think that some folks from Sustainable Silicon Valley are here, which is also a really amazing group. And the thing about the Silicon Valley and in California in general is that a lot of people care very deeply about this stuff, and there's a lot of amazing groups doing wonderful things. So we see ourselves as really being in a place where we would like to work closely with them, and we're all stronger when we work together. So we're very excited for that. This event would not be possible without our sponsors. So I want to really thank our sponsors here tonight. We also have opportunities for future events, so if you have a space that you think would be really cool, or if you want to sponsor the next event, please do come talk to us. But I would like to invite John from Adis Architects to come up and say a couple words about them. Us.
So Margot gives me 2 minutes, so I'm going to give you 2 minutes. So first of all, I want to say we're really proud to be able to sponsor this amazing panel. I mean, water has become a growing interest and concern for me personally, and as I've been getting to know all the human beings, a lot of the human beings actually are in this room and on this panel. It's just really exciting to have such a great group here in this really great place. One of my favorite places in the whole Bay Area is right in this room. I think I'm about 20 seconds into it. So I'm going to tell you 2 stories, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm telling you this story. So actually 1 story is actually 2 parts. So Adis Architects, we've been school architects, so that's what we've been known for. About 6 years ago, we had the honor of actually designing the first net zero energy public school building in the state of California. It was very exciting. There's a whole story that goes with that. But more importantly, as we finished that, I got a call from a good friend and client in Campbell that said, "Hey, I hear you're designing a net zero building for Evergreen School District." And I said, "Yeah," he goes, "I want to." And it sort of changed my perspective on why people do green buildings or sustainable buildings. When I got my LEED, so that's the story. But the why I'm telling you that story is that when I got I passed my LEED accreditation exam in 2001. So 15 years ago, I thought that, oh my gosh, LEED plaques are going to be leaping off the shelves. Everyone's going to be going after this thing, and I was going to be positioned for it. But in the public school sector, it just really hasn't been that way. And I realized is that for some clients, it's not about a plaque. Maybe it's about their electric bill, or maybe it's about teacher retention, or human productivity. And what I realized is that it's about all of those things. And it's about you, and it's about me, and it's about my kids, and the world that we leave to them. And so why are we sponsoring this? Is I think that electricity, energy, future, we can't be just school architects. We're architects of a sustainable future, and that means everything that we do and everything that they do.
All right, so our other sponsor for this evening is First Community Housing, and Hillary's going to say a few words, but first I'm going to introduce her as your moderator. So Hillary Knoll, or I guess, sorry, your narrative. I really hate public speaking, if you can tell. As a registered architect, Hillary leads the design capacity and sustainability at First Community Housing. With over 10 years of design experience in architecture, green building, as well as community organizing for environmental justice, Hillary furthers FCH's mission to develop, design, and build award-winning affordable housing in underserved communities throughout the San Francisco Bay Area. Hillary looks to natural and historic context to guide her process for regenerative design, for the built environment and nature combined holistically, which is inspired by building an awareness of materials, history, culture, and ecology. Noel has a lot of amazing certifications and does a lot of amazing stuff, but she can tell you she's won a lot of awards, and she's currently a Rose Architectural Fellow. So I'm going to turn it over to her. Enjoy.
Thanks, Margo. Thanks, everyone. This is a wonderful turnout. Yeah, briefly, First Community Housing is a 501c3 nonprofit affordable housing developer based here in San Jose. We're celebrating our 30th year this summer. We've developed over 20 properties that serve families, seniors, extremely low income, those with developmentally disabled, the chronically ill, and for about 15 years have been really at the pioneering edge of green building. We've won a code award for some of our multifamily, our Gish project just up the road here. Have set LEED Platinum as a design standard for everything in our portfolio going forward. And just in the last couple of years have really turned to the Living Open Challenge as where we want to head next. So we participated in a national case study with the ILFI, culminating in a publication. It's the pathway or framework for affordable housing going forward, and now are a part of a team of sort of peer-to-peer group nationally of innovative affordable housing developers looking at how we can get this from being just an exclusive thing for the wealthiest communities and really allow it to impact those who will benefit most from healthy living environments, lower utility bills, adjacency to transit, and all the other benefits. So that's FCH hat, and now I'm going to turn and put on my moderator hat for this evening. So just to cover all our bases, as Margo mentioned, this does qualify for 1.5 hours of AIA CEUs. Sign up at the door if you didn't already. The learning objectives are there. You can read through if you like. But tonight's panel discussion really came about, I think in part because we wanted to work as closely as possible in conjunction with the California Congress and all that they're doing this year to really hone in on the water issue. I know Margo did a quick poll, but I think it would be helpful for all of us to get a better sense of who's out there tonight. So folks who identify as architects, intern architects, architectural designers, raise your hands.
Or marketing people in architecture.
That's coming, you guys have landscape architects. Great. Engineers. Building owners or developers. All right. I guess I'm half of it. And what else do we have? Urban designers, planners, great. Biologists, excellent. Sustainability consultants, maybe? Okay, great. Anyone else I missed? Okay, contractors, builders. Oh, good, okay. That's excellent, we need you. Oh, and government or policy. Yeah, of course. Sorry.
Wait, what about marketing people?
And what about marketing people in architecture? Okay.
What about ecologists?
Ecologists. Great. So, based on some photos here of the kickoff charrette that we held in October, just across the street, the SOFA Marketplace. And this was our inaugural event for the South Bay. Culminating from that, we really, water became the clear topic to focus on. It's pretty evident that the effects of climate change, really coupled with carrying capacity of the Earth that's reached its limit due to overconsumption, population, is having now what we're seeing as severe effects on the water supply globally. 1 in 6 people internationally, that's 1 billion people minimally, don't have regular dependent access to clean potable water. And here in Silicon Valley, where we're privileged enough to have that in most of the developing world, we do such things with it as flushing our toilets with it, right? So there's an obvious disparity going on, and it's not just about access, it's also about quality. Your quality of water may be determined by your zip code or your level of income, as we're seeing as things unfold in Michigan and other parts of the country. A little closer to home, my job is just to sort of set the stage, so I pulled up a map about water supply. Looking at our region, this is specifically Santa Clara Valley, about over half, 55% of the water sourced in our watershed is coming not from our local watershed. So if you will, it's a sort of a complex intermixing of these watersheds. It creates quite a complex system. And 40% is local and 5% is reclaimed and reused water here in the valley. And then if we're lucky, we're getting about 19 inches of rainfall on average, just to sort of map out what the resource access is. And I know our panelists are doing a much better job going into that. I wanted to take a minute to go through the LBC, just really high level. I know about half or more raised their hands, familiarity for the Living Building Challenge. But essentially, it was launched in 2006 by the ILFI, which grew out of the Cascadia region of the Green Building Council. It's now in its 3rd iteration of being the most stringent green building rating system around the planet. It's not only a green building rating system, though. It's also a philosophy and an advocacy tool. It takes on the metaphor of a flower, if you will, in the way it approaches both a left brain, right brain thinking of our built environment and how we want to approach it. The LBC really, at its core, is about mimicking natural systems, natural flows, and the flower does that really well. It's exemplary at that. It captures all of its energy that falls on its site through its petals and the photosynthesis. It uses only water. At the end of its life, it gives back to its site, its local community, and it's literally rooted through its place. And finally, it's beautiful, which is something we should all strive for in our design projects. Also a challenge. Why a challenge? This is about, are you telling me? Thanks, Margot. Can you guys hear me okay? No. Okay. No. Can't hear a thing? Okay. Thanks, Bobby. Rather than sort of doing less bad, which oftentimes the lead building rating system could be accused of, it's sort of how much less can we pollute. Green building rating system of the Living Building Challenge says, what does good look like? It's really about tearing apart the dominant paradigm and rethinking what could be, what is ideal, and how do we pull the market forward with that space from inspiration. The Living Building Challenge is broken up into 7 petals, drawing further on that metaphor of the flower. Many of these are familiar to us, energy and water, but it also talks about things that we don't always think about or try to measure. Equity, happiness, beauty, again. And then there are 20 imperatives, which are mandatory to reach a full LBC certification. These are broken out into each of the petals, and they're essentially the equivalent of a lead credit. So they're the means of which you achieve these petals. One thing that's interesting about the LBC is it allows for scale jumping among many of the strategies taken. This is particularly important, I think, when we begin to talk about water and very interconnected systems that do need to look at district and neighborhood and other scales beyond the building boundary. The LBC has a couple of certification paths. For folks who do want to find out more, they can go to ILFI's website. There's full certification down to net zero, and then a petal certification, which really asks you to work on one of the toughest petals, water being one of them. So for tonight, just to set the stage and I think define a little bit so we're all on the same page with net positive water and what we're really referring to. Jump to a couple definitions I know I'm going over. So black water being everything that is coming through toilets or urinals. In some jurisdictions it also includes any water waste, so kitchens and dishwashers and that plumbing. Gray water, anything else that's plumbed that is not the above mentioned. And then stormwater is sort of broken out both into rainwater and stormwater. Rain, I believe, falling on a surface such as a roof, storm hitting the ground. Just so we're on those key definitions, all on the same page. And then the net positive water imperative from the ILFI is defined as using the water only that falls on a project site, not drawing from any public utility, treating all water used on site, and ideally getting to the positive part, not just a net zero, but giving back and doing something greater than sort of the sum of the parts of that water that you're working with. This can include working with natural systems, so thinking about biophilic design elements and how we engage with natural systems that maybe were once on that site in a regenerative way. So with that, a brief introduction, you guys are going to take us much deeper into this. I didn't put up your bios. They're a little fuzzy, so look at these faces up here instead. This is a better version. Yeah, higher res, that's right. So bear with me. I'm gonna read through such an esteemed panel. We're really grateful you guys made the trip. Many of you coming down here to be with us tonight. Josiah Kane, registered landscape architect at ASLA. Josiah is the Director of Innovation at Sherwood Design Engineers. In addition to managing Sherwood's Innovation Lab, he works with some of the company's most influential clients on sustainability strategy, ecological integration, and district infrastructure systems. Josiah has been at the forefront of ecologically integrated built environments and sustainable design, including green roof, urban ag, stormwater, rain harvesting, black water, gray water reuse applications. In the process of building several sustainable design firms over the last 20 years, his clients have included California Academy of Sciences, the San Francisco Transbay Terminal, and some of the largest tech firms in Silicon Valley, as well as major universities nationally. Josiah teaches and lectures widely. He did a stint at Cal Berkeley, is a contributing author of Sim Vanderen's most recent book, Design for an Emphatic World, and is on advisory boards of Spur Green Infrastructure, Stanford's Renew It, and the Cradle to Cradle Product Innovation Institute. And he's a member of the California ILFI Congress. Right? Okay. Mariana Grossman. Mariana is a thought leader on innovation for sustainability and climate action. Through Minerva Ventures, she works with companies, cities, and other agencies to align their plans, strategies, and products, as well as services, to address mitigation of and adaptation to climate change at the scale of the challenge. For nearly 7 years, she led the Sustainable Silicon Valley organization, a multi-sector network that was founded in 2000 to bring in the ingenuity of Silicon Valley to create a more sustainable region in the world. And while at SSV, Mariana established a Space Act agreement, I love this, to collaborate with NASA on solutions for planetary sustainability. She led products on sustainable transit, smart grid for energy and water, and launched the Net Positive Bay Area Initiative. Previous roles include Partner for Sustainability and Innovation, corporate roles in automotive, computer, and semiconductor industries. You sit on a long list of boards, so I'll stop there, but I'm really grateful to have you here tonight. And next up is Gil at the end here, out of order, my fault. So Gil is the City of Palo Alto's first Chief Sustainability Officer, and he's considered by many to be one of the founders of the sustainable business movement. He was named an inaugural member of the Sustainability Hall of Fame by ISSP, and one of the 10 most influential sustainability voices in America by The Guardian. For more than 40 years, Gil has helped companies and communities design, implement, and measure profitable sustainability strategies. He's previously a founder and CEO of Natural Logic, Inc., and now serves on various boards, including as the director of the Ecological Building Network and on the advisory board of Green World Campaign. Gil lectures widely on business strategy and sustainability issues, is the author of the acclaimed book, The Truth About Green Business. It has a forthcoming book, Profit on Purpose, risk, fiduciary duty, and the laws of nature. He holds an MS degree in systems ecology from Antioch University, has a black belt in Aikido, and is a seasoned practitioner of the natural step environmental management system. And Bill Worthen, fellow of the AIA, a lead fellow, and Greenpoint Rater. Bill's the founding principal of Urban Fabric, which is a sustainability consulting and communications firm based in San Francisco. For over 20 years, he's balanced policy development with professional and public advocacy, practice and experience, industry research, and peer-to-peer education. Bill served as a member of San Francisco's Green Building Task Force, resulting in the city's Green Building Ordinance, which was the winner of the first World Green Building Council Leadership Award in 2011. Up until 2012, Bill represented his profession in the AIA's Council, the Government Leadership, the National Director for the Resource Architect for Sustainability, and participated in the LEAD version 4 as a member of the Implementation Advisory Committee. He's now serving on the C40 Cities Climate Positive Roadmap for the Clinton Foundation and the AIA California Chapter for Energy in the Built Environment Steering Committee. He's currently very focused on water reuse at the building and district scale and how to apply life cycle assessment as a design tool. So we look forward to hearing more about each of those. We're going to start with you, Josiah, to kick us off with really a higher level and sort of ecological infrastructure perspective of these issues. So the way it's going to go tonight is we're going to have about 5 to 7 minutes from each of the panelists to sort of answer the question, what is the current lay of the land in Silicon Valley to get to net positive water through their own expertise and professional lens. We're then going to open it up. I have several prepared questions, but we really want this to be engaging with the audience, which is part of the venue selection and not being up at a podium or too removed from everyone. So we'll raise hands and Margot can run out with the mic. The plan is to wrap up around 7:15, and the conversation can continue informally afterwards. So.
Thanks for having me. Am I a self-advancer?
I
mean, that's fine.
Yeah.
So, thanks for coming. I'm Josiah. And I actually do work at Sherwood. We're a boutique-ish civil engineering firm. Probably the only civil engineering firm I know of that does color graphics, which is kind of fun. Which is why, being a landscape architect, I'm actually an engineering firm. As you can see, we're in New York, San Francisco, and Houston. Most of our staff are here in the Bay. And we do a lot of water stuff. To some extent, I think we're probably best known for sort of net zero water engineers. And I've been enjoying this slide lately, not because it has so much density that you need to go through it all. There's a couple of things. I mean, landscaping, 57% of our water use. In California, very often. Commercial is much higher. It can be 80% of our water use, not necessarily irrigation, but doesn't have to be potable. And to me, that's a key driver that I think needs to be important when we think about where we're getting our water from. Does it all need to be the cleanest, safest drinking supply ever known to mankind? Or can some of it actually not be that clean? I also think there's something about this, the water crisis. Are we having a water crisis or are we having a thinking crisis when we have the cleanest, safest, most reliable water supply ever known to man, and 80% of it we're using to flush our toilets with? Like, I think it's more of a design and thinking crisis than it is a water crisis. I don't really think we're having a water crisis, actually. I just think we're having a water management crisis. So moving to what I was talking about, this is an example of a campus where conventional, 100% of the water would be glacial melt from Hetch Hetchy, right? That's what we do. We take really amazing, clean, incredible water that supposedly makes the best sourdough bread in the world, and 80% of it goes to cooling towers and toilet flushing and subsurface irrigation. So moving to the right, if you start using rainwater, recycled water from the city, In this case, we still needed, being Silicon Valley, still needed some drinking water, some of that clean, safe, reliable water to mix in because the salt levels are pretty high in Silicon Valley's recycled water, and it'll kill plants and cause problems in cooling towers and things like that. So to reduce the salinity, you put some clean water in. But once you get to that point, you realize that we could actually treat sewage only on site, which had lower salt than the recycled water down by the ocean, because the plants are so close to the ocean they have problems with seawater coming in, which is why they're salty. At which point we could actually not use any potable water that wasn't required by code to be used for potable. At which point you can see the light blue is how much Yosemite water we're using, and the rest of it is not coming from that source. So I think, to me, thinking that way about sort of tailored water is a lot smarter than just trying to think about wholesale volume, which is kind of how the mainstream is doing it right now. So I just kind of want to compare scales. You know, the idea of toilet to tap, that we're going to take sewage and we're going to run it through high capital expense, high energy input, high maintenance, expensive systems, and mix that water back into our drinking water and magically make our drinking supply get bigger. It does work. There are some issues with reliability that make me a little squeamish, and frankly make state officials a little squeamish too. But there's also some issues with just the impact, the carbon and the energy and the embodied footprint of this kind of a system. And I won't get into here the problem that it causes on the wastewater side too much either. But if we increase supply, then we eventually have to start increasing our wastewater capacity, which means bigger pipes, digging up streets, bigger wastewater treatment facilities, because we have more wastewater than we used to. Looking at purple pipe sort of networks, it's interesting because I seem to always have somebody telling me either that these are too expensive, or if it's somebody trying to push back on a proposal that we have to build it, then I get people saying, oh, you know, you're not really contributing much to the community, it's just some cheap pipe. And I'm kind of like, well, which is it? Is it too expensive to put in, which is what you hear from proponents of toilet to tap, or is it too cheap to really consider a big community benefit, which is what you hear from people who don't want you to build? So trying to navigate those territories. But to me, the bigger issue is the giant public sector capital investment that's necessary to do something like this that we don't seem to really have much available. So we do the district approach with birds and flowers and nice green colors. But there's a lot of good things about doing things at the district scale, and I think probably a lot of people in this room know that sort of public-private partnerships are most likely the best vehicle for doing that, because you have somewhat complicated relationships between private sector owners as well as with the city. Sometimes the city is also an owner, sometimes they're not, but they're always someone who has a stake, because Department of Public Works, public utilities, things like that. So getting into districts, this is some work we're doing down in Southern California. What's really interesting about this is the purple and the blue are basically places where thousands of gallons of perfectly clean groundwater are being pumped into the stormwater system every day in Los Angeles. And the little green dots are places where the city owns land that has high water demands. And so if you start doing some GIS and overlaying that, you're like, wow, there's actually a lot of water going right into the sewer pipe in places where they actually need that water. And it's for cooling towers and irrigation and flushing toilets. It's not even necessarily drinking water, so treatment can be minimal. So just looking at these kinds of studies and going, wow, you can see some district areas where there's blue and green circles overlapping with green demands. It becomes pretty simple analysis. And so the way we're kind of looking at that right now is looking at what we're calling a resource chassis. And that has to do with really creating a platform that can evolve and use new technology to integrate water and energy together. Diving in a little deeper and really looking at how can that also be a resource in a place like Silicon Valley that gets very hot at times and cooling loads go up. And so also a lot of open space. So can we put wetlands that process water in that open space to help control the climate while also creating the water that's necessary to run the equipment to mitigate against that climate? you're actually helping yourself on both ends. It might sound outlandish. I just saw a study from Zofness presented at Harvard, researchers from Phoenix, showing 10 degrees of ambient temperature drop across one single block just due to vegetation, so shade and evapotranspiration. So to give you some idea how these systems can actually make a huge difference in your cooling load, I see a few MEPs here, 10 degrees difference, that's going to change the size of your equipment, it's going to massively change your energy model, and it might even change, to some extent, how your glazing and building actually has to operate. So looking at how ecologically integrated, overlapping systems that are using ecology, sort of living building challenge style, to really make a big difference. I'm probably blowing right through it.
Yeah.
I haven't hit 7 yet.
Yeah.
So zooming right through, there's great tools for understanding how these actually make money, which is why the private sector is wanting to build them. It's an interesting time right now because the private sector, at least large-scale landowners, want to build it. It's not that you have infrastructure people who are trying to encourage people to build it, although you're getting some of that. But because it pays, everybody wants to do it. And the question isn't, who's going to do it, it's who's going to do it. Looking at sewer mining as, from my point of view, very inexpensive, very low input, very easy maintenance, make mediocre water quality out of sewage, which is under all of our streets, and use that for somewhere between 60 and 80% of our water demand at small scale, where you don't have to build a citywide network, you only have to build a network big enough to service the area you have, kind of like the heat map from Southern California I showed. And eventually those systems can be connected, and they can also be connected to municipal systems. So these systems don't have to be isolated, and they can be built piece by piece, and that's kind of where we're heading. It's where we're heading at Hudson Yards, which is a massive project, the biggest private project in New York City's history, I believe, where we're putting a bionic sandwich of landscape and ecology over Penn Station's rail track system, which is its own crazy thing. Doing some very similar things in India Basin with on-site wastewater treatment and an isolated subgrid for purple pipe, and offsetting water dramatically using a park feature that creates natural features somewhat similar to the Bay Edge as a resource. I see Blue Mac out here who's working on that with us today too, by the way. Something similar in New York City, just finishing this up. Croton Aqueduct, they put a 9-acre treatment facility underground so that nobody could blow it up or throw cyanide in it. And we worked on putting the park back on top, so 9 acres of green roof. But in the process, we discovered 10 cubic feet per second of foundation water that they had a permit to put in the stormwater system. And it turned out that we could replace all the Jersey barriers and security features of the project with a nice little table they had for water features. And so now, instead of a bunch of concrete barriers around this park, they have ponds around the park, and these wetland cells actually filter the water, and then the golf course next door can use that water. And they had plans to build a pond next door, but didn't have a water source. So just thinking about how water can actually really be used as an asset instead of just a liability that you have to make a deal with the city to dump it in their pipe. And I'm going to end it there. And who's next?
That's my dog.
We were asked to keep it to 5 to 7 minutes, so we tried to keep it to 5 to 7 slides. I have 8. And we all like to talk. All right. Good evening, everybody. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. My name is Bill Worthen, and as I said, I'm the founding principal of Urban Fabric Inc., Sustainability Consulting and Communications. We're based in San Francisco. We also have an office in New York. We're in those two cities for a couple of reasons. One, we had the right people, and I grew up here, or I didn't grow up here for the last 15 years. But we found the right person in New York to open an office there, as well as San Francisco and New York are the two places where the regulatory environment is pushing or pulling green codes and policies in a way where what we're trying to talk about today can happen, and happen at scale. So my subject today is to talk about water. I'm going to share my story of buildings we worked on, projects we worked on, and some of the codes and policies that allowed that. But I wanted to start with a thought. How many people have a gray water system, or are in their home? In their office? Black water system of any kind? Well, usually there's even one. And then there's things like sewer mining and other, okay, no sewer mining. Building on what Josiah said, it is my position that there is plenty of water in the state of California. It is just not where we want it, when we want it, in the form we want it. And to me, as an architect, that's a classic design problem. And that's also a huge opportunity to think about how we can reuse and rethink water in the state. This is actually an overlay of 2 images. I thought it was kind of cool the way it works, so it's not supposed to be, it's a couple things going on. It's the aqueduct and one of the pumping stations. 5% of the total energy used in the state of California is used to pump water over from the base of the Grapevine over to LA and the southern half of California. And I want to say that again because that's 5% of the total water, or the total energy used in the state of California is used to pump that water over. That is a huge amount of energy. So water is energy, and energy is water. We've also, for a very long time, thought of our systems as a linear system. That it comes from, well, who knows, we had the slide in the beginning, so most of our water comes from Hitachi or up in the mountains, and most of the state of California gets its water from a completely different area than where we live. So even when it rains, we don't really understand that that's not necessarily helping us depending on where we are. And with the drought, while the reservoirs are full, the northern part of Northern California is doing okay. Southern California is still really below what it needs to be, and we're still going to be in a drought for quite some time. But our opportunity here is to think about how we can stop the insanity of using water once as it comes out of your tap and rethinking how we can use it. For me, one of the aha moments in this is that 95% of the water that's used in a commercial office building could be supplied from non-potable sources. The only things that you really use in your office that you need is the stuff that you drink or that you touch. Everything else, cooling towers, which can be an enormous amount of load, irrigation, and then toilet flushing really do have a massive amount of load, and that's a huge opportunity. And then in multifamily residential, 50% of the water can be supplied from non-potable sources. And while not quite as good, that is still a huge opportunity. And I'll also say when you use water reuse systems in buildings, I'm going to show you several of the projects we've been working on. One of the interesting points is low flow fixtures don't necessarily help when you have a black water system or a gray water system. A little more volume might actually be better, and if you're reusing it, what difference does it make? We could debate that, I'm sure, in a lot of ways. But I'll just say that as a statement. So, while we mentioned the term toilet to tap, in the context of what I am talking about today, and by the way, the terms black water, gray water, sewer mining, none of these are friendly phrases that we want to have in our buildings. The first, whenever I bring up the idea of water reuse in a building, it's usually the architects, not to pick on ourselves, but I am one, so I guess I can do this, are the ones that I don't want that in my building. It doesn't smell, and a lot of us, for those of you who went to architecture school, how many of you took a class on water reuse? Okay, 1, 2, not a lot, many, and I didn't have one either. For what we're talking about in the context of what I'm going to show you for the rest of my talk, we're not talking about toilet to tap. We're talking about matching up non-potable supplies with non-potable uses, either at the building or the district scale. And when you think about what I just showed you in the previous graphics, that is a huge opportunity. And the key concept here, no matter what color it is, no matter where it comes from, whether it's a puddle on the street, the water in my Coca-Cola, a cup of coffee, or out of the tap, water molecules are water molecules. There is no magic, there is no chemical process that separates water molecules from all the other stuff that's in it, whether it's seawater, whether it's toilet water, any of that stuff. It is just a matter, unless it's radioactive, there is nothing to do to separate other than a process of filtration. And that process is actually fairly simple. Your intestines do it, there's lots of different, the tidal flow wetlands do it. We simulate that, and all of the water on the planet has been here for a millennium. We're not making more water when we talk about any of this. All we're doing in the concept of this, and for water reuse at the building or district scale, is speeding up that process and doing it in a way that makes sense. You also get energy out of that process and nutrients that can be used for fertilizer. We've got NDAs on companies that are actually looking at turning into a powder that can be burned and used for fuel sources. Lots of opportunities, because when you think about utilities, if we reduce the flow in all of our sewer systems, and we do, and we reuse all of our water in the buildings, we're going to muck up our sewer system as well, which is kind of the counterpoint to what you're talking about in terms of what we can do. But that's where we are. So some of the projects that we work on, each one of these buildings that you see is in San Francisco or the Bay Area, and each of them is saving over 1 million gallons of potable water a year. San Francisco, the city and county, brings in 180 million gallons to 250 million gallons of water a day from Hetchy. So while these are buildings that can save over 1 million gallons, the airport's going to, the transit center is going to save 8 or 9 million gallons of potable water a day and use it for, take the water from the park on the top, take all the water from the sinks in the restrooms, run it through a gray water system, use it for irrigation and toilet flushing in the entire terminal. That's a building, it's the Bay Transit Center, that shouldn't have an environmental footprint. It's a transit center, no one works there, no one lives there. It should just be something you pass through in the same way environmentally. That's what they were trying to do in that idea. The building also has to be ventilated for a large, about 70% of the building. And we're using those tanks of water when we store it as a heat sink, and that allowed us to eliminate a cooling tower and put more space back on the roof. It's that kind of integrated system that allowed that system to pencil out, because I can tell you the cost of water and the cost of that system had a very long return on investment we were looking at 5 or 6 years ago. SFO is putting in a district scale system for all of its projects at the airport. And then I think one of the projects, 525 Golden Gate, has anyone been to 525 Golden Gate? It's the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. It has a living machine black water system in it. It is that building that allowed the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission to put together the grant program that allowed most of the other projects that you see here to go after that grant. It will give you, if you can demonstrate in the city and county of San Francisco that we can save 1 million gallons or more of potable water a year, the PUC will give you $250,000. 181 Fremont, the tower you see in the upper left. Those are luxury condos on the top, 2/3 of office buildings on the bottom, connected to the transit center. And these are high-end, 3,000 bucket square foot condos that are going to be sold. Those condos are all going to be flushed with gray water, and there's a membrane bioreactor sitting in the basement. And I actually was trading emails this morning with the marketing team, where we're selling that as an amenity to everyone who's going to be buying those units. And J. Paul Company, the developer, is very, very proud of the fact that they've designed that in. It also allowed us to get to LEED Platinum and a lot of other things, and it was well before the government declared its water emergency. But they made the right choice ahead of time, and they're getting the benefit from it. That's kind of forward thinking that allowed all the other projects you see at the top to put in those gray water systems. And while there's still gray water, that's moving in the right direction, and now we're having that happen in every building that's over 250,000 square feet is now required to deal with on-site water reuse in San Francisco. That's starting to move to LA, and it's starting to move to other places. Right. So one of the key things, and my closing thought here, from my experience with dealing with water reuse over the last 5 or 6 years, there aren't a lot of practitioners that understand how water reuse works. So while there is Urban Fabric Inc., our sustainability consulting firm, we also have the Urban Fabric Collaborative, which is our 501c foundation. We received a grant from Google, a California Council, United States Land Structural Engineers, the PanCal Foundation, to develop a practice guide on water reuse. We're having our kickoff meeting April 14th and 15th at the PUC headquarters here in San Francisco, with the intent that this practice guide will be out by January, February of next year to teach architects and engineers and policymakers and practitioners about water, how you do a water budget, how you pitch it, how gray water works, what the different technologies are, what size of systems they can work in, residential, commercial. And I can tell you the technologies are all across the board, and the cost of the equipment is all across the board. And you have to understand what it's about, the filters. But this document will be out next year, and that's supposed to be a tool and a resource to help us understand how to make water reuse normal in the building and district scale. So thank you.
And the founder of Minerva Ventures, and we work with helping companies and businesses think about the risks and opportunities of climate change consequences and how to adapt to those and take action, including in the areas of water and energy. So we're excited to be here and be part of this conversation. So there's been a conversation about how we have plenty of water. I have some pictures that might give us a sense of how much water we're likely to have going forward in this wonderful water system of Northern California producing water that we can send to the rest of the state. This is a view of Half Dome in Yosemite in March of 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. And this year, there is a bit of snow, but not as much as in 2011. And one thing we also know is that in this chart shows 3-year, each dot is a 3-year average. And 2014 was the hottest, driest of all those periods. And 2013 to 2015, I think, will be even further up and to the right. So the point is that we may have precipitation, but it's not going to stay as snow in a persistent way in the mountains. And how our hydrological system has worked is that water percolates down gradually over time throughout the year. And so I think one of the things we need to be thinking about 10, 20, 30 years out, we know that global average temperatures are going to keep increasing because the greenhouse gas emissions from 20 years ago are just causing effects now. So there's a delay in the planetary climate system. It means the consequences show up. Even if we went to 0 carbon and greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, which would be fantastic, there's still a 20-year delay of the emissions we've already put in. So if you're thinking about a building that's going to last more than 5 years, what's the water future going to be like for that building? So along the lines of what the other distinguished members of this panel have said, we like to think about water on a site basis. It could be at a building or a site or even a campus or a neighborhood. And what if every building or area needed to source its own water? Right now there's inputs on from the public water supply, either drinking water, municipal recycled water, and also rain and storm water coming into the building. And then the building itself produces water. Gray water, black water, maybe dewatering if there's a sump pump or some kind of water being pumped out of groundwater, and cooling tower blowdown, maybe condensation, or there are other types of water that the buildings produce. And as Bill said, the potable uses are a small fraction, so this chart is not a pie chart, it's just showing kind of different types of water. So the potable uses are very small, anything that kind of affects human health. And the non-potable uses are much greater, and up to 95% in a commercial building. So when you think about a water budget, what does your building need to do? And what are the purposes and sources of water, and trying to match those. In San Francisco, there's great legislation that allows, regulations that allow buildings to even share. If one building is sitting on top of a buried creek and it's pumping out a lot of groundwater, they can treat that and sell that to other buildings and become like a mini utility. And when we learned about this, we thought, oh wow, this is fantastic. Let's bring what the San Francisco's got, their health department, their building department, their public works, and their water department all working together. And they've come up with these great systems, and they have grants, and they have rules, and they have guidelines. We thought, great, let's just take this and we'll bring it to San Mateo and Santa Clara County. That should be fun, and that should be easy, because it's so clear that we need to not flush drinking water down the toilet. Let's make this happen. So of course, as you can imagine, there actually were barriers to implementation. And in San Mateo County, I think there are 22 separate cities and towns. I think in Santa Clara there are 16. Plus each county has unincorporated areas that they run. The counties have the health departments, and each city has their own building and zoning and planning and public works, and they also have different sustainable groundwater management groups that are managing different parts of the aquifer. So it's very distributed. The drinking water people don't really talk to the sewer people, because we don't call it sewer people, we call it wastewater treatment, water quality control. Anyway, there's a kind of a hierarchy, just like there is in science. The physicists aren't really interested in the chemists or the biologists, and the drinking water and wastewater world also sort of tend to have some barriers. And I know you probably all know that plumbing and architects and trades, and we have a lot of stratification in our world. So that's a problem. And there's unaligned regulations. There's also a lack of coordination. So in the city of Mountain View, for example, the city council thinks that they've said, yes, we want to do water reuse, but in fact, the way the regulations get enforced, it makes it very hard to do. So there's a lack of alignment just within a city government from the policymakers to the different departments. And also often the lack of understanding and coordination among the departments, and also everybody's super busy, so they don't really have time to be on a new committee or learn a new skill set. Water pricing is based on, by law, on current costs of water. So how much does it cost to deliver water today? So they aren't actually even allowed to say, well, what if we have a drastic continuation? I don't like the word drought. What if this new reality is that we have water scarcity where we used to have water abundance, and we have to produce water differently and manage it differently? Then the price of water may have to adjust. And water is also a human right, so the baseline has to be very cheap. And then some community, I think Santa Maria, just got sued for trying to have a tiered water pricing system. So, and the people who show up at the water board hearings are usually people retired on fixed incomes. And they say, no, you can't raise my water bill 5 cents. Although actually there was a poll in Santa Clara County that people were willing to have their water bill raised a little bit for environmental reasons. But generally, you get a lot of pushback if you're a rate setter, and if you're elected, you don't want to have the voters get mad at you. So water pricing has to shift, and one thing that would make a lot of sense is having a cap and trade system, that if everybody had a water meter, which doesn't actually exist in a lot of the state, although they're gradually being put in, but if everybody had a water meter, you could say everybody has 100 units for a residential household, and maybe however many equivalent units that would be for a commercial building. And if you use less than your 100 units, then you can sell the savings back to the water system, or you could even donate it to nature, kind of a cap and trade for water. Or if you use more than your allotment, then you pay more. So it'd be kind of a clear feedback system. That doesn't really exist yet. And then there are concerns about health risks, lack of clear process and metrics, which Bill is trying to address with his new guidelines. And then also a budget conflict between CapEx and OpEx. So if I'm going to put in a district or a building water reuse system, that requires a capital expenditure, but the operating budget and the capital budget are often not connected. So some solutions. We're working on convening kind of small-scale meetings to help people work through the conflict between all the different departments. And with advanced sensing tools and metering, you can do a lot more distributed management of water and have people put in systems that they don't necessarily understand very well, but can be managed and can be done safely. And then there's also some great financing tools to convert CapEx into OpEx expenses. So I'm going to give some of Bill's examples here. The Living Machine in San Francisco is a really neat system that uses anaerobic and aerobic bacteria and plants to treat and reuse wastewater. They also have some other neat systems. That building is really worth having a tour. There's a company called the Solitech, which is based out of Israel, that does reverse osmosis technology that uses 35% less energy than traditional RO and also produces more water, so less waste costs. And they have lots of applications for that, can fit in with lots of different systems. And then another example from Bill's presentation, Aquacell, which is represented by Phoenix, has a membrane bioreactors. So those are 3 different types of water treatment systems, and as was mentioned, there are many other types available. So the last thing I wanted to mention was there's some funding mechanisms that you can use to turn the capital expense into an operating expense and start to align the conflict between the tenants, the developers, and the owners of the building. So Clean Fund uses commercial PACE system, which property assessed clean energy, but you can use PACE financing for seismic, energy, and water upgrades, and for paying soft costs like engineering and architecture and things like that. So and it gets paid through your property tax. It's kind of a little bit complicated, but when you actually do it, it lowers everybody's costs. It's an inexpensive source of money that creates benefit for all the different parties that are usually in conflict with one another. The Community Bank of the Bay, New Resource Bank, and Beneficial State Bank are all examples of local banks in the Bay Area that have green loan funds that are looking for investing. And if you want to have your bank account and your savings or other funds like that making a difference in your community, you can put deposits there, just kind of a cool thing to know if you're a business or an individual. And then also you can access those funds for projects that, such as the ones that I just mentioned. So I think that's my last slide.
Thanks, Mariana. Hi, everybody. I'm Gil Friend. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Palo Alto and Chair of Natural Logic Consultancy. And I suppose I'm supposed to back cleanup and tie this all together with a ribbon and a bow, but I think I'd like to take you on a little walk from the sublime to the ridiculous and leave a mess on the floor and see what we can do to figure that out before we go. My mentor, Buckminster Fuller, used to observe that the way we talk about things really affects how we think about things. And the language we use is just fundamental to what we're able to do. And the most common example we talk about is we still, in this day, talk about sunrise and sunset. And we know, at least since Galileo, that the sun's not moving, the earth is turning, but we still say that. And we still talk about drought, even though there's no drought. There's the lowest snowpack in 500 years. The last century was the wettest in California in the last 2,000 years. So we've got a big hydrological shift problem. We've got a problem that California civilization's been built on a hydrological anomaly. What do? How do we redesign to deal with that? And of course, we're talking about impossible changes, but impossible changes happen all the time. Certainly this is a part of the world where we produce impossible changes that then move across the whole planet. So I'm going to hop around through these, so I want to get to a couple of points. Palo Alto's got a long history of sustainability leadership in many dimensions, sustainability initiatives since 2002, one of the first climate plans in 2000, initiatives since 1970s. Tremendous progress on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We're in the middle of bringing a new climate plan to council in the next few weeks, and this is some of the work we've done with that. And you notice here, not only a huge drop in emissions, but if you look at the chart, you see there's a green bar on the left that goes away. Anybody hazard to guess what that is, whether you can read the legend or not? That's electricity emissions. So we've taken our electricity carbon neutral, eliminated almost more than a third of our emissions. But there's a water challenge in that, which is that we've done that by having electricity that is in theory half hydro and half renewable. Actually, it'll be that by 2017. We're in progress toward that. But this year it's 30% hydro, because the hydro's down. And so the whole carbon neutral electricity strategy that we've laid out, that is one of the leading utility strategies in the country, is at risk by this shift in the hydrological regime. In summary, some of the things that we're looking at in the climate plan, you can read them here. I'm not going to read them for you, but we're bringing to council a proposal to reduce emissions 80% by 2030, 20 years ahead of the state of California's goal, which is one of the leading goals of the world. Part of the key to that is going to be reduce subsidies to the things that we don't want and aim them at the things that we do want, to Mariana's point, to make it more convenient not to drive, rather than try to deal with congestion concerns by building more of the roads and parking garages that make the problem worse in the first place. And to embed sustainability into everything we do. So let's talk about that in the context of water. Here you can see some of the strategies in water. I think the question is, what if we looked at integrated long-term strategies that combine efficiency in water harvesting and groundwater management and use of recycled water? And I'm sorry, I'm not tuned up on all the proper terms for what to call different things. My distinctions are sloppy. On-site water treatment, what would net zero water look like? Not just for a building, we have a few examples of those now, but what would that look like for a district? What would that look like for a city? What would that look like for a region? We have the example, Bill McDonough has often talked about this, of what if we could build buildings that were like trees, which are the classic example of solar-powered, closed system, non-mechanized water treatment systems. LA, the rainfall in Los Angeles is about half the water demand of the city. Even in Los Angeles, the city's about 75–80% impermeable, so most of that water goes down the streets, into the drains, out to the sewer, with expensive energy and chemicals to treat it. I was just, when I was playing on my phone a little before, I was trying to rough out the numbers for Northern California, given that 19-inch rainfall. It's a few hundred gallons per capita per day. So what's the possibility of living on ambient resources here? Can we have cities that run on sunlight and that live on local rainfall? And I think that in future generations, people are going to look at us like we were insane that we use drinking water to flush poop. I'm like, how could you have possibly thought of something so stupid? But here we are. And so the bad news is that the challenge is not just one of mindset. It's lack of tools to do the simple analyses that we're talking about, even the CapEx versus OpEx conversion. It's regulatory barriers, as Mariana talked about. It's siloed organization. It's people in these organizations. So I've been the last several decades advising organizations from the outside, and I made a decision in 2013 to go inside and see what that's like. And I'll tell you, it's tough. It's really tough, partly because people have a very clear responsibility to deliver operations and services the next day that are reliable, whether it's clean, safe electricity or clean, safe water, often short-staffed, often under-budgeted, with complicated policy and procedure hoops that people need to jump through, budget processes that force you to think so far ahead that you can't learn along the way. Things you learn have to be put off for a year or two. We've overcome some of those in Palo Alto. We've had a policy since, I think, 2009 to do life cycle costing as part of our capital budget process. But we don't always do it, because we don't always know how to do it. The tools aren't always there in all cases. We've found little inroads. We're now, we have a policy to favor electric vehicles for our city fleet. Well, they cost more to buy, but if you look at life cycle costs, it's about $5,000 less per vehicle, as well as zero carbon in our situation. But it's an uphill battle to kind of get those things introduced, and even with that done, the mindset and awareness and habits take over, and so even though we've had this policy for a year, we've added one electric vehicle to the city fleet. It's a marketing problem. In this case, not just an economics problem. So one of the things that we're suggesting to the council as we start to talk about the climate plan is some design principles. We know that we can't engineer a 15-year pathway, 14-year pathway to 2030 and line up every step that needs to be done along the way, which is very challenging to the engineering mindset, which wants to do things like build bridges where you know how long it is, you know how much steel you need, you know how long it's going to take, and how much it's going to cost, and you may have cost overruns, but it's sort of in line. Very different than building software, where you might create a platform to build a bookstore, and then you start selling clothing, and then you start selling music, and then you start selling videos, and then you start selling the data services and supporting all that, and then you're like half $1 trillion company like Amazon. It's a different process, as is the ecological design process, where things need to be able to evolve and adapt. And our government structures don't do that very well. So this is my big uphill challenge, is to suggest that maybe there's a set of principles that we could use to guide the efforts that we're going to take over the next few years. And one of which, as I said, is to use ambient resources. One is to use full cost accounting, so we really take the cost not just of life cycle, but of externalities into account in the financial decisions that we make. Align our incentives and build flexible platforms so that we can take steps now that are the best ones we can take today, but don't block us from taking the steps we might be able to take in 2 or 3 or 4 years. We recognize that as a city, how am I for time? 2 more minutes. We have 4 different zones of control that we can operate in. We have at the core the city operations. We run our own buildings. We can do whatever we want with them in theory, subject to regulatory constraints. We develop codes, we issue regulations, we basically compel other people to behave a certain way, which they will or won't, so there's a wider reach and less degree of control. We have the incentives and education that we do through our public utility and other mechanisms to encourage people to shift their behavior and actions and investments. And then least impact but widest reach is the regional and statewide policy and coordination that we all do together across these many cities and many counties to try to find a common way to move through these issues. So one of the places where we have some control is this, Water Quality Control Plan. It's another term of art. This serves a half a dozen cities and Stanford University, operated by the city of Palo Alto. traditional wastewater treatment plant, but looking at recycled water strategies from a water supply perspective as well as a treatment perspective. And I guess you can't read this mouse print, but there's a disciplined and thoughtful effort underway to think that through in terms of technology, economics, regulatory issues, future demand, and so forth, and plans underway with the city in collaboration with the Santa Clara Water District and others to extend the purple pipe runs. But people are challenging that. Do we want to bring wastewater down the hill to the treatment plant, pump it back up to the Stanford Research Park, or do we want to think about decentralized treatment systems there? The challenge is there. One of the challenges is that the folks who operate this thing take their public health responsibility very seriously, and it scares the dickens out of them to imagine dozens or hundreds of treatment plants across the city run by who, with what quality and what rigor, and how do you ensure public health? So that's a challenge to those of you who are looking at those. We know we have examples at Stanford, we have examples at NASA with the Earth Station 1 there. NASA has a very simple idea to wastewater treatment. They don't do any of this cascading of water quality. It's just all pure water, requiring no maintenance, requiring no labs, requiring no periodic inspection, because you can't send somebody up to the space station to service it. It's just got to be right all the time. So how can we learn from that? How can we learn from what NASA has done, from what Stanford's done? How can we learn from the tree and adapt that into the really challenging regulatory and fear-based environment of government, where there's not room for experimentation and failure, as there might be in some private companies. So I think the challenge is how do we move powerfully in uncertain times? We don't know what the future is going to bring in terms of climate, technology, regulation, chaos in society, certainly the elections coming up this fall. So, but we have to make decisions right now. And so our suggestion to our local government is to set strong directional goals, even if you don't know how to reach them, which makes bureaucrats crazy. But it's one of the ways you need to do if you're going to experiment and innovate. Have clear principles and criteria. Again, I would suggest that those need to be rooted in the ecological wisdom of 3.8 billion years of R&D that living systems have done for us. Flexible platforms, rapid and agile prototyping. We tend to plan on multi-year cycles, so it takes us a long time to learn things from our mistakes. What if we could do faster cycle, learn in 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, experiment and shift, and then as a city with a commitment to open data, we want to encourage timely and transparent reporting so people can see what's happening, see what's working, see what's not working, understand not just the physical flows, but the data flows so that people can come up out of the neighborhoods, the companies, the laboratories, the universities with better ideas and build together in a shared learning environment. Tim O'Reilly, the technology publisher around here, I'll leave you with this, said, pursue something so important so that even if you fail, the world is better off for you having tried. We don't know if we can get to 80% greenhouse gas reductions by 2030, but I know that if we don't set that goal, we won't get close. And if we set that goal and get to 70, well, hell, that's not going to be a failure. That's going to be a great success and another example of the leadership that this region is really known for. So let me stop there, and let's hear some questions.
So I want to be mindful of time. So I'll kick us off with a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. But I don't know, it is about 7:10, so maybe we'll go for 15 or so. Does that sound good? So I'm glad, Gil, that you mixed it up and got us to sort of this more imaginative place. And one of my questions for each of you would be, if you could model or achieve one unrealized replicable water system that could show local optimization with all of the things that we've just discussed, what would that look like? It's a high level tour.
I have a practical example. There are 4 companies in the North Bayshore neighborhood of Mountain View that want to do water reuse on new buildings that they're doing. And so to me, success would be working with the public agencies to allow that to happen really quickly. And then it could be an example that people can come see. And also they're global companies, so they can take what they learn here and implement it in their operations around the world.
Three things. To pilot on-site treatment in City Hall in Palo Alto, number one. Number two, to establish a net zero district in downtown Palo Alto. We have people who are talking about doing that for energy, like to introduce water into the mix. And third, which is out there, is to introduce a net zero zoning requirements. So if you want to build in Palo Alto, which is very controversial these days, people don't want more growth. What if the condition of growth was net zero? No new energy demand, no new water demand, no new greenhouse gas emissions, no new transportation demand. Performance-based rather than prescriptive regulation.
So two thoughts. One, rather than when you go to get a building permit telling me how much water you need, why don't you show me how much water you can save? And have an incentive-based program based on that. And number, which is somewhat where our policies are starting in San Francisco too. And number two, at the district scale, I've been on the Central Summer Eco District Formation Task Force, and it's now in its government structure phase. But being able to find a site somewhere in the neighborhood, perhaps one of the larger developments that will be coming in, to put in a centralized sewer mining water project that starts with that, turns it into energy, turns it into power, and shows that you actually can be a net zero water or a net positive neighborhood along with all the energy benefits that come out of the stuff you get out of that water. And we just don't see that yet, but it's totally doable. And we have the technology, we just don't have the will to change.
Those are fantastic. So one thing that's been occurring to me, and I'm so glad that we've all called out this misnomer of the drought and that messaging around there. But I guess, what are the shortcomings, or even what are the dangers of a continued public dialogue that's really dominated with these messages of just conservation, behavior modification, and of course the D word? And should and can that be shifted to messaging about design and the built environment? And maybe a third part of that is, how can we be better at messaging and marketing? Maybe we need more marketers in this room. So any thoughts on that, and in terms of how we steer that dialogue in public and grander scale?
I'm going to go against the grain and say that I actually don't think sort of individual-based conservation marketing is that important. I mean, if it was illegal to irrigate your landscape with drinking water, you would have to take longer showers to have enough water to not kill your landscape, and you would use less water. So if you just think about that for a second, it's not a failure of behavior, it's a failure of the way we're managing your resources for you and the way you're engaging with it. So if it was standard practice to either have a regional scale or a district scale or a building scale water reuse system, and you couldn't use the cleanest, safest, most reliable water ever known to mankind to flush poo and run cooling towers and irrigate, that was illegal, we would instantaneously transform the entire infrastructure to function perfectly well with the water we have. So I don't think we have to go through this whole guilt and marketing and all that stuff. We just have to do a smarter job of managing our resources. That's my thought.
And just to build on that, I think it's really important to realize that rules and policies build market possibilities. So once you have the rules like that, then you create a huge market that will drive down the cost of water reuse systems and increase the knowledge of the plumbing and the engineers and the architects on how to do those systems. And I think systems are really important, that trying to get people to behave well to fix a systemic problem actually blames the individuals in the system. And really it should be a default that when you turn on the tap, it should be clean water that has a low energy footprint and is the right type of water for the right purpose. And that is a design thing. So I think we have to be thinking about, how do you design, just like in manufacturing, you make systems that are mistake-proof. You don't blame the individual and do a lot of training and stuff to get them to stop making the same mistake over and over. You go, oh, it must be a problem with the system if this problem keeps coming up. So kind of take a page out of the Total Quality Manual and apply it to the way we run our energy and water systems.
We've got two really big challenges here. It's not marketing, it's thinking. We need to not learn how to market, we need to learn how to think, because we mostly think in terms of individual, separate pieces of stuff in a world that's connected, and that you can, most of the folks in this room think in terms of pattern and relationship, not in terms of things. If you have fundamentally different design strategy when you do that. Several of you talked about examples of where we're sub-optimizing the system by taking action we think is right for the immediate crisis, but actually has systems effects that take us in the wrong direction. So you don't get to that by marketing, you get to that by learning how to think and recognize pattern. The other challenge is that it's not just a matter of regulation, it's a matter of kind of rolling the implementation of these new systems through society, and it's not trivial, and it's not fast. And as we look at net zero and carbon-free energy strategies for Palo Alto, we find there's really simple logistical problems, like how long will it take to upgrade all the electrical panels in town to be able to support all electric homes? 22,000 buildings, 30 a day for 15 years. Are there people around who can turn the wrenches? Now, I don't know what the answer to that is, but and that's not a water issue, but I raise that to say, if we did what you're saying, what are the steps and how long does it take to ripple that through thousands of buildings? In San Francisco, we've got terrific examples of iconic buildings that are valuable because they show what's possible. And they show this, this is not a crazy idea. Here it is, it works, it's economic, it's safe. People like to be in those buildings. The buildings sell, they'll sell at a premium. That's great. But to go from there to shifting hundreds of thousands of households in the region is a really deeply challenging issue that we need to think through. We can't get there by random. We can't, well, we're doing it random now, and we've got some fairly advanced green building ordinances, and so we're putting steep requirements on all new construction to perform well ahead of the California standards. That's great. We're putting steep requirements on renovations above a certain size or value. That's great. But those two together are a fraction of the building stock in the city. And so, most think about where you live. If you own your own home, are you planning to do a major renovation in the next year? Or in the next 5 years? Well, if you're not, how do we accelerate the shift of the underlying technology and resource support systems ahead of schedule in a way that work for you, that are economical for you, because we can't mandate anything that's not cost effective. There's a whole other conversation about how you determine that. We'll save that for another time. But, so one of the things I do now in this job that I never did before was think about the nuts and bolts, day by day. What does it take to roll something out across an entire city? The regulation may be the easy part, as hard as that is.
So several of you, many of us now are aware of what the city and county of San Francisco has been able to do because of that unity that they're sort of fortunate to have. So considering the multiplicity of the districts that Mariana, you laid out so well, are there actually maybe some benefits or some advantages to having those regional differences and some of those discrepancies? So that's one half of the question. And then I guess the second is the best approach a singular district by district, or are you thinking more integration to unify each of those? So just any thoughts broadly on that, because I know you were only able to touch on the years of work that you've done, and of course if anyone else.
Yes. It's my feeling, after having several strong opinions over the years about how we should solve the problem, that we need all of the tools that we have. And there are some places that we're gonna need graphene, reverse osmosis, toilet to tap, desal, etc. That should be the last resort. So you don't start with the nuclear bomb. You start with diplomacy. And I feel like going straight to these really mechanical, high energy input, potentially environmentally destructive water manufacturing options is the nuclear option. And I think all the way at the other end is some of this stuff that's happening with individual homes, and I think it's great. If people are excited about it, we have a great code for rainwater and gray water now. I've had success using sewage for subsurface irrigation. It never sees the light of day. No one has access to it. Why wouldn't you just use that water for subsurface drip irrigation? It works great. I've done that in 3 counties in California now. Somewhere in between, there's regional purple pipe systems. We have them here. We have them in San Francisco. Some cities are saying they don't want to do it. Some cities are tiptoeing into it. No city seems to be able to cover the whole city. And we're also working with some cities who have wastewater pipe problems and water supply problems. And so we're doing some work where you go, well, let's show us where the wastewater pipe problem is, and maybe we can find a college athletic complex right next to it and take the water out of your pipe, solve your wastewater problem and your water supply problem with the same move, fund it privately, and they're going to find, as water increases in cost, that they're going to install their own infrastructure over to the neighbor, because now they can sell him water, and over to the other neighbor, and pretty soon they're going to bump into the city system, and then we're going to have to deal with how does the city work together with increasingly the resources are, Bernie keeps telling us where they are, right? and those of us who work for a living know who they are, because that's who we work for now. And we don't have tons of mid-sized projects anymore. We have a few enormous projects, and I think everyone in this room has that experience. And so what that means is that those people who are keen to provide leadership and innovation and build stuff that they own and that has business continuity and resilience aren't just private coveted resources, but they're integrated with community benefit systems. And I don't think that the private sector or the public sector can afford to build a mediocre, lowest bid recycled water network while these really wealthy people build Lamborghinis of water treatment and reuse that are going to work no matter what. That's not the right solution, but it's going to take everybody working together.
I do think that the state has a role to play in setting rules that are consistent. To try to go city by city to set zoning rules around water reuse, I don't think is efficient or sensible, because especially the smaller towns don't have the resources to really think it through. And it also was a nightmare for developers and builders and plumbers and everybody if every single one has a different plan and approach and process. So the standardization across the state, I think, makes a lot of sense. And I think the other key thing to think about, I had this brilliant thought and it's just shifted out of my mind. I don't want to let go of the mic yet, so I'm going to talk until it comes back. I know.
I'll give you a minute to think. I have a practical reality comment on it. In San Francisco, you can sell water from one lot to another. We have a project that has basically a creek that daylights underneath it, and we're trying to figure out the water quality so we can use it as a water source. And you talk to everyone that does a gray water system that supplies them, they're like, oh no, we don't want to use groundwater or surface water because we don't know the chemical content. It would be better to reuse the water from the sinks and the showers. Which, on some level, I functionally agree with, but we have this water source, and even the people that are developing the technology don't want to use it. So we have some things that aren't quite fully worked out yet. We also have 2 other projects that are multiple towers or multiple residential and office building or multiple residential buildings where we would put in one district system to service all of both of the towers of the 5 buildings on these 2 projects, and the developer has chosen, because they might want to sell the buildings and parcelize them, that they don't want to share resources between the buildings. So we're putting in 2 separate gray water systems in 2 separate buildings, even though the regulatory environment supports it, just because they still can't, we as a culture can't get our head around drawing a pipe or a line or a power or something across lot lines and sharing resources. And whoever can figure that out in a regulatory environment, that is the big key to making this work and to give developers to buy in and make it happen. I'm sure you
But to Mariana's point, let's be very cautious about having a single consistent policy and regulatory environment across the state of California. Because Los Angeles is not Eureka, and San Francisco is not Fresno. And the conditions are different, and if there's one thing we know as ecological designers, that we need to be adapted to place. One of the challenges we have right now is that our advanced energy strategy is jammed by the California Energy Commission, which has policies in place that made really good sense on a statewide basis, but didn't take into account the possibility of carbon neutral electricity in a city. So we actually can't do certain things that make sense because they don't fit the regulations, and they can't be modeled in the regulatory software. So I understand the impulse to want to do that, and I think we have to think about, what are the parts that need to be consistent, and what are the parts that need to be variable, and how do we understand that difference?
I did remember my thought. So on that point that Gil made, I think it's important, but I do think there can be a floor that says, just like we have for safety, when you step on the floor, you know your foot's not going to go through it. Kind of think of a floor and then let people go above that floor. And I think right now on the water, there's not that common guidelines for how do you do these things and how do you enable that. So that should be enabling legislation. So there's another type of issue, sea level rise, where having lots of little towns is nice in a certain way because it makes democracy closer. So you can get to know your city council and your mayor, and they can come to your house, or you can go to theirs and chat with them or whatever. It's accessible, it's more democratic. However, when something like sea level rise, we have 101 cities in the 9 counties of the Bay Area, and all the ones around the edge of the bay have to agree, Mountain View puts up a seawall, then that will flood Sunnyvale and Palo Alto, and not to speak of East Palo Alto, which is in San Mateo County. So there really has to be a combined approach to that, and maybe a regional or state level leadership to make that happen. If you think about the Bay Bridge broke in 1989, and the old Bay Bridge still hasn't been fully dismantled. There's still problems with the new bridge, and how many is that? 26 or so years later, 27 years later. And that was one, the MTC and Caltrans were responsible. They can have tolls, they can do bonds, they can do all the engineering. It's one structure. If you think about it, it's still really not done, but at least they accomplished it. But it's basically a 3-decade process. But if you think about sea level rise, there's uncertainty about the magnitude and the timing and the scale of the problem. There's lots of different ideas about do you do horizontal levees or whatever. And this is all relevant to water supply because our water outflows of our sewage treatment plants are all at sea level. And the water, drinking water also can be affected. The whole delta system is extremely vulnerable to seawater intrusion from sea level rise. So there are issues like that where our governmental structure is not suited to give us a way to manage these big issues. And people get together in meetings and committees, but to actually do joint design engineering, to finance it, to make it happen is, we don't know how to do that. And I think that's a challenge.
So do any of you know examples where that has worked? Where multiple jurisdictions across a county or across a region have actually gotten together and figured out how to make something like that go together? Any examples come to mind?
I don't know if it's about utilities. I think about the VTA and the light rail. I mean, you get multiple cities and they've all kind of gotten together to form a transportation system.
That's a smart train.
Anything around water? Anywhere in the world?
The only thing I know is what the PUC got different agencies from around the world together to start talking about what their issues are, and they realized that what they're dealing with in Japan is the same thing that they're dealing with in Tennessee, and so they could actually, so the first step was to realize that they're all dealing with the same problem. Their idea isn't unique and their problem isn't unique, but we all think our problem is special. And that's the first part. We all think that no one else is dealing with our problem, and therefore we don't know how to ask for help. We don't know how to communicate with each other. So that's happened, and that spawned out the policy version of the practice guide that I was talking about.
I would just say with water, Israel and Europe have both done a really interesting job. Successful for different reasons, right? Israel just did it at the national level. That's one way to make jurisdictions work together. And Europe just been there so long that they had to figure it out, I guess. Also, just a fun fact, San Francisco gets twice as much rainfall as Mountain View. Just to underscore what you're saying about even just Mountain View to San Francisco could be that different. I don't know. I should know, and I did know, but I don't.
I just want to say, it may be that people are getting a little bit tired, but I'm hoping that you don't leave discouraged tonight. I think that this gathering, this room is an example. People voluntarily coming together to continue their own education, to create community, to work together, to share ideas, to put out bold ideas and say, hey, let's make this happen. And I think that's amazing. We're really lucky to live in a democracy, and I think we need to exercise our vote. We need to show up and help each other. And this kind of evening, to me, is very inspiring. So I don't want to let all my scary negative comments ruin your mood, because yes, it's true, we do need to face reality, and we need to have solutions at the scale of the challenge, and we need to tell the truth. But I think we also need to love each other and be kind to one another along the way, and to celebrate. And I also want to make sure that people know that Cafe Stritch is looking forward to your purchasing their wonderful beverages to help support this event, and we want to support a great enterprise like this too. So I just want to give people that sense of hope and possibility that we're all here together doing great work.
Yeah, exactly. That was my next move. Do we have questions from participants?
Who's curious?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if you guys can give any examples of projects here in Silicon Valley that might be inspiring or interesting, or maybe they're in the works.
There's lots in the works.
Okay.
Any not under NDA?
Well, there's one sustainability base at NASA is using a forward osmosis system that for gray water that is used on the space station, and it is possible to organize tours there. In fact, I'm organizing a tour there for an agency, a governmental agency that's coming through and looking at green buildings all over the place. So that's one example that in Silicon Valley.
Which, by the way, is the coolest toilet you'll ever see.
Well, there is at this, the Environmental Innovation Center in San Jose, which is also where Prospect Silicon Valley is, they have examples of composting toilets and other things there too, some really nice water reuse. So you can experience using, and then you can go down in the basement and see how the tank works. So that's another good example. But there are people who are working on projects.
I mean, I would just add that along the lines of what you sort of closed with, my concern is not that we can't figure out how to solve these problems. My concern is that we continue not to choose to do that. And so the politics and the culture part of it is much more important than the technical problem. We don't have a technical problem to net zero energy or net zero water. We don't even have a financial problem. What we do have is an intractable cultural problem of not selecting the right answer. I don't know if it's the Winston Churchill, you can always count on the United States as the right thing after exhausting all other options. Maybe we're just doing that. I believe that. So, but anyway, the inspiring moment for me is we totally know how to do this, people. There's not this like, we don't have to all go figure out like, oh, this is terrible, like humans are bad, we're melting the planet. No, like, we know how to solve all these problems. We're just behaving incredibly stupidly. And that's I think everyone on this panel would agree with that. I mean, that's the thing we need to fix.
Everybody is behaving incredibly stupidly? Stop.
Yeah. But how do we change that?
There's a reason that I went into design. I thought about that one and I just went.
Bobby?
Yeah, it seems to me that we have the technical expertise to do these kind of systems, but that the government, you mentioned the word fear-based, really puts up a blockage. And then you're talking about getting all these different disparate departments to work together. I did a project up in Pacifica, and afterwards the environmental health didn't find out about it because she said that there were like 22 different departments that had to go through. And then they found out about it. I mean, it's like, how do you deal with that kind of massive situation?
Yeah, that's a great point. And one of the questions I had that I happen to know that the California Congress at the policy summit at Net Positive had some pretty significant discussions about what it would take, what the feasibility and the implications would be of having a unified California water use code. So maybe that's a good sort of action-oriented, optimistic point to close on, and then we can let folks grab another drink and have side conversations. But if any of you would like to comment. Okay.
To your question about government and fear-based and so forth, the government's us. The other thing that Winston Churchill said that I love is that democracy is without a doubt the worst political system ever been devised by man, except for everything else. So this is what we got, and what the government is doing, with your votes, with your tax dollars, with your activism, being active or not. And so it falls to all of us to say this is what we want. City governments, city staff are fear-based, and city governments are fear-based because they're afraid of being criticized by voters coming knocking on the door at city council meetings. So they need to hear from people about what you want and what you applaud and what you want to see more of. And to the extent that we don't do that, we're as much the problem as government or bureaucracy or anybody else we can complain about. So it touches every level. And, I guess the last thing I'll say is, anybody here ever tried to change a habit? And if your hand's not up, you're lying. You know that. Anybody ever tried to change a loved one's habit? So, yeah, and it always does. And now try to change not a code official or 100 people in an organization or 50,000 people in a city. This is not easy work, but this is where a lot of the work lives. The good news in that bad news story is that, have any of you ever tried to change a habit and done it successfully? It can be done. There are ways to do it individually, and there are ways to support each other in doing it. There are ways that it can happen even at the level of culture.
Okay, we'll take just one comment about the fear issue. I understand it's a public health issue to treat black water and supply it for non-harbor users. But think about issuing a driver's license. You're giving this person a killing instrument, and then you have to trust this person that it's in her best interest and everybody else's best interest that she does the right thing. So I think that people who are going to be using recycled water also want to do a good job. So they need to be trusted. These things have to come together.
I think there's another thing about fear is that people are trying to do the best that they can. And with the DMV example, there are rules, there's enforcement, there's the highway patrol and police, there's training, there are things to try to make people less lethal than they would otherwise be without those things. And I think the other thing I try to remind health officials is there's a health problem of not having adequate water supply. So if you have a hydrological system that isn't delivering the kind of water we're used to, that not having enough water is also a health problem. So try to balance it out so you're not only thinking about, oh my gosh, what if there's a pathogen or something in the water supply, but what if you don't have enough?
So I'll try to end on a happy note here too. So for all of us that do sustainability consulting, we're all here in the green building world and all that, a lot of what I see what we do every day as sustainability consultants is professional life coaching. All we do is translate and hold people's hands and encourage them that yes, you can try that, yes, it's possible, yes, you can make it happen. Let me show you what's it going to take to get in your head, to get you to slightly get out of your comfort zone and push you, and that's whether that's LEED credits, whether that's a certification from a building, whether that's something else, that's the opportunity, and we all need, but if we are the ones that are afraid of it and don't understand it, then we're never going to get it past our own mind. So if you're asking about what about gray water and black water, I think it's going to make sense. I'm going to show you how it's going to work. That's how it's going to happen, and it's people. Again, it's not the technology forcing it, or even saying, I want to flush my toilets with black water, I want a composting toilet. How do you get them to want to put that in their building? And that's a psychological question in large part, and that's what we do. That's what gets me up in the morning. I guess we're kind of good at it, but it's fun to try to make work.
All right, please join me in thanking our panelists. Just as we close, as Margot made the pitch, this is an emerging group, this collaborative, so please come up to either of us. If you're not on the email listserv, there's a sign up at the door, AIA credits are also there. But we look forward to 3 more quarterly events this year. If you have ideas for subsequent events to build upon the foundation that we sort of laid today, come have that conversation. Thanks so much for coming out, guys. It's a wonderful turnout.
Now we're
He's